the West Coast, the East Coast, and deep in the heart of Texas. It's the Geek at Arms podcast with Brian, Mike, and James.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Geek at Arms podcast, a podcast camped squarely at the crossroads of geek culture and Christian faith. I'm James, and finally, back together are my friends Mike and Brian. Brian, how are you today, my man?
I am jazzed to finally be doing this. I have missed you guys.
So have I. And now Mike is going to let us know he could take it or leave it.
I am so thrilled. In my wake, glitter and confetti just burst into existence behind me. And my wife's really upset. I mean, since I'm just walking away, I'm just like no help with any of this trailing mess.
I did not consent to Peaky Pie in this relationship.
Yes, right. You're cleaning this up.
Like, and it's no help trying to run away and hide. I mean, the trail leads right to me.
But seriously, that's a very terrible medical condition. You should seek help.
I have had my fair share of terrible medical conditions for which I have sought help.
I know, but I think you just found one that will be named after you.
Finally, this is what I'm remembered for. Oh.
The Michael Confetti Conflagration.
Oh.
Yeah, it's been a minute since we've all been together to record. Thankfully, we've been able to release Geeks at Play episodes, but getting back together to do an actual Geek at Arms, yeah. Life's been crazy. Life has been busy for all three of us. And we've missed doing this. And I'm just happy. Just happy we're back together again.
Indeed.
Yeah, so let's do this. Who's first?
I'll kick things off with Geek Out. Gosh, so much has happened the past few months. So I'm really going to condense this down as much as possible because I could spend 45 minutes talking about all the great stuff that's come out. I'm going to start off with Dune 2. That movie was every bit as good as I hoped it would be. I mean, it could have been a line of Fremen just doing the sand walk in jazz hands. I still would have stuck around for the entire almost 3 hours and walked away going, that was pretty good. That wasn't bad.
There was a 3-hour sequence in Jodorowsky's Dune of exactly that. So that's fine.
So was very happy with it.
See, it's funny because I walked away feeling kind of meh about it.
Really?
Yeah. Like, I can't quite put my finger on exactly what, except for the fact, because I thought that they did a smashing job with Chaney. I mean, I just absolutely love the fact that they kind of brought a new perspective to that character, where she just kind of perpetually looks at the camera and silently asks, what am I getting out of this other than crapped on? And I do appreciate that.
So basically you're saying Dune would have been like if it was done by the directors of Parks and Rec.
I mean, in some senses,
Paul becomes the Kwisatz Haderach and Johnny's just staring at the camera.
They made a lot of changes. I would say that a lot of the changes were justified, because if you make a book accurate, Paul, I mean, you're just going to spend the entire almost 3 hours saying, wow, why am I watching this jerk? But I feel like the second act kind of dragged.
Okay.
I feel like that's where that's where I feel like we kind of lost the momentum. Like, for me, this is and I fully acknowledge that my experience is outside of the norm of my friends and family, but I'm like, I feel like it just kind of lost some of its momentum. I'm like, what are we doing? What are we cutting? What are we not cutting?
Completely fair. Yeah. Now, it has been, honestly, I don't even know if I actually finished the book, but if I did, it's been 14 years since I did it or didn't do it. But personally, like you talked about, that was your viewpoint. My viewpoint on it is I really enjoyed it.
Good.
So apparently it's been so successful. It made all the money, and they're going to do a Dune, I think they're calling it Dune Messiah is the semi-working title. And from what little I know, which I have gleaned from Wikipedia and from talking to you, Mike, stuff's about to get really weird.
No, it's not. Things are about to get weird. It's when you start covering yourself in sand trout and turn yourself into a 1,000-year-old sandworm. That's when things get mostly weird. When you get another 2 books in is when things get really, really, really weird.
You know, you're right. I guess my definition of weird is different from someone who secretes confetti. So it's all perspective. It's all perspective. But moving on, 2 months ago was Texas Blade Show. Had another great day. Went again with my father and one of my sons, who he asked to go. He had an okay day. You know, I don't think he quite knew what he was getting into. Hundreds and hundreds of tables of knives. While, you know, he might be a few more years removed from being able to really appreciate them, he did have a good time. People were passing out balloon swords at the front entrance, so he was able to get one of those, and that made the day much more enjoyable.
I was really worried about what was coming after that long pause.
Like, people were passing out into the blade cases, and there was a lot of blood.
You know, it's funny. Thousands of people go into this event where there's hundreds of thousands of knives, and the worst injury that has ever happened can be covered up by a Band-Aid. So
blisters.
Yeah, or just people taking a look at a knife and going like, I need to check the edge on that. Whoop, it's really nice. That's the worst that happens.
15% of people have a Band-Aid on their thumb, right?
Yeah, exactly. So everyone there understands the assignment, and people just aren't stupid, thankfully. So, great day. A lot of new companies and vendors there that haven't before. They made the hall bigger at the Fort Worth Convention Center. They expanded the size of the hall to accommodate more tables and more companies. There was a few more there this year that I was really hoping would be there. And of course, that made it really hard to choose where I was going to spend my money. But in the end, I chose a knife from Chavez Knives called the Chavez Redencion 229 Kickstop, which is a very long name for a very cool knife. I'll post pictures with the podcast info on the website. It's lived in my pocket since purchasing it, and I'm enjoying it. I will refuse to say how much I spent on it because I just am going to. And I also did not spend as much this time as I have in years past, because a month later, I went to the large SCA event known as Gulf Wars. Had a really great war. I went by myself this time, camped out, just really enjoyed it. Really nice weather. Had a couple of days of great rapier melees.
How many other wars start? I had a really great time. I camped out all by myself. I mean, it's like just you versus the entire other army. What kind of war is this?
One that they didn't expect, but they were happy to finish.
He is the Lisan al-Gaib.
I'll tell you what, my daughter would be happy if I looked like Timothy Chalamet, you know.
That's exactly how it's pronounced.
You know, Benedict Crinkly Fries' nephew. But the fighting was great. I competed in an event called the Onsture and Roses Tournament, and actually made it to the third round. And considering that this was one of the most premier, highly regarded tournaments in the entire society, single elimination, the fact that I made it 3 rounds deep I'm happy with myself. Like, the 2 guys who made the finals are widely regarded as, if they're not the top 2, they're in the top 5 of fighters known anywhere, any kingdom, anywhere. So, always great shopping in the marketplace. Once again, I could have easily dropped so much money there. My big purchase was a new 14th century style coat hardy and a hat, because it was sunny and I have a horrible habit of forgetting to put on sunscreen. And because I didn't want to become a giant melanoma, I bought a hat.
So does the hat match the coat hardy?
No, it doesn't complement it, but neither does it horribly clash with it. It's a giant white grayish felt hat that covers me completely and keeps the rain off, and that's what I want it to do. So, hat accomplishes.
I mean, complementary and matching are so much more modern concepts anyway, so, you can still clash and be in period, so.
Yes. I mean, just look at anything that the Germans wore, throughout various periods of time. The Landsknecht, and there you go. The last thing for my Geek Out is, in our last episode we recorded together, I talked about Godzilla -1. More recently, Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, came out. And while Godzilla -1 was very much a study on post-World War II guilt, survival, and rebuilding of society. This one was much more in the vein of a traditional Godzilla movie, which is, who cares about the humans? We're not going to remember their names. Give us giant monkey fighting atomic lizard.
See,
which the movie delivered. It was very entertaining, a lot of fun. It borrowed from various elements of past Godzilla lore while adding its own, and was just fun. You don't go there to think. You don't go to a Godzilla movie for deep intellectual thoughts. You go there to watch the monsters fight. In that regard, it was fun.
Sounds like they had a horrible missed opportunity, though. Like, the last one was Godzilla -1. You've got King Kong in it. This could very easily have been Godzilla +1.
Well, Godzilla times Kong. I think it's still a math equation.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. All right, fine.
And that will wrap up my geek out. Who's next?
I think it's my turn. I was recently badgered into joining the Visual Effects Society, and as a result, I've been given a free subscription to Netflix. I haven't had Netflix in a while.
Nice.
So I was looking around at all of the things that are on Netflix that I haven't watched and seeing, Avatar and One Piece and all of that. And so what I decided to watch was Bee and Puppy Cat.
Yes. My youngest loves
why,
this.
And I watched the whole thing, and I'm still not entirely certain what it's about.
Yeah. No. If you're trying to figure out what it's about, then you've missed the point.
Yeah, I think that's the case. It's a charming little show that I don't understand, and that's okay with me.
Yeah, I think it's more like Gen Z humor, but there is something about Bee that is more kind of like the lost Gen X. In this, I don't know. No, she's just a mess.
She is definitely a mess.
And I kind of get it mixed up because my youngest would watch it on YouTube on our TV screen. So I kind of get the two variations mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
Is she unemployed in the Netflix version, but somewhat gets jobs from this, I don't know, extra dimensional supercomputer or whatever that is?
Yeah, she gets fired from the cat cafe in the first episode.
Okay.
And then, does the temp jobs for the weird interdimensional television.
Yeah, this is a show that I have on, but seldom really intently watch, because I'm not sure I get much more out of it from giving it my full attention. But I'm just glad that it's there for some reason.
Yeah.
And also I've noticed that Puppy Cat is far less foul-mouthed in this version.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's like Puppy Cat is just this Vocaloid. I mean, it's a wonderful sing-songy voice that is just indiscernible gibberish, so it's always subtitled, but the subtitles apparently for Netflix, they cleaned it up a lot.
I can believe that. The particular kind of humor that's coming through in the show, I can imagine he probably was really foul-mouthed.
I mean, it wasn't like filthy. I mean, we're not talking Has Been Hotel or anything, but it was just, it was just a lot more of an angry character that was not afraid to tell people how it felt, despite the fact that they could not possibly understand.
Yeah, I could never quite figure out if other people could understand him. Bee apparently can.
Yes.
But I don't know about the other characters.
Yeah. I think that's
sometimes it seems like it. Sometimes they treat him like a person. Sometimes they treat him like an animal. It's strange.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds a little bit like an R2-D2 situation.
Yeah.
You never know what he's saying, but you know for a fact it's foul-mouthed.
Yeah.
Well, so foul-mouthed they had to bleep it out from Star Wars.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Speaking of YouTube, on the YouTube front, I have found my new favorite person. Angela Collier is an astrophysicist. I don't know if she's still employed somewhere or if she has just decided to make YouTube her job. But I ran across her first because she came into my feed for some reason. Something about I didn't know Frodo died at the end, which it's like I never thought about that, but yeah.
Yeah, you can't live in the Western realms for very long if you're mortal.
He went to heaven. That's dying. Anyway, so I watched this entire hour-long conversation. She says, and I had never read The Lord of the Rings, which is strange because it's right up my alley and I love the movies, but I'd never read it. And I got to the very end and I realized nobody told me Frodo dies at the end. So I enjoyed that so much that I watched another one, which was
Bilbo was wondering what Gandalf was doing with that shotgun.
Right. She delivered this long, again, hour-long video diatribe on the state of science communication right now, while simultaneously playing and beating the Binding of Isaac. And so I thought, yes, this is my new favorite person. And I have watched maybe a dozen of her videos since then.
Bring her on
and
the
they're
show.
they're all way too long.
I'm looking at her YouTube channel now, and there's everything from how to teach yourself physics. Of course, antimatter falls down. The physics of Pokemon evolution.
Yes.
Yeah, bring her on the show. You
deep.
just invite her. She'll come on. It's fine.
Yeah, straight up.
Fine. Yeah, like
I've always said this podcast needs more theoretical physicists.
Oh, I think every podcast needs more theoretical physicists.
Of course.
you hear that, Retro Rewind? More theoretical physicists.
Absolutely.
PaulJPowers.com is somewhere going, that's what I've been saying.
I actually was thinking he was. So why is he here?
And finally, I had an incredible opportunity as a result of my job to visit Obsidian Studios.
Oh, no way.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I got to go down to Inglewood, and I'm so stupid. I've got a camera riding around in my pocket all the time, and it did not occur to me to take a picture of myself with the power armor that they have in their lobby until like 2 days later I realized, oh, hey, I should have taken a picture of myself with the power armor. But I did go there. I don't have photographic proof, but I did. And I got to personally thank their chief creative officer for Fallout New Vegas and the Outer Worlds. They're giving the tour and we're walking around and all of the computers are all in offices and everything. I'm just kind of like trying to peek in the doors to try and see what people are working on. But all of the screens are tilted away from the doors, so I didn't get to see anything. I didn't get to see much.
I feel like there's quite a lot of planning that went into the fact that all the computers are facing away from the doors.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it's probably a policy thing in the manual. But got to talk to them and find out how they're using Houdini and what they're going to do, what they're working on for the future. They didn't actually ever say anything specifically, so I had to just kind of infer what they're working on. I'm reasonably sure the Outer Worlds 2 was one of the projects that they were talking about, and they have some kind of a pirate thing going on. That's already been announced, so I'm not letting a cat out of the bag.
I would play a pirate game from Obsidian.
I would pirate a game from Obsidian as well. Wait, no. That's not. Wait, no. Hold on. Geek at Arms listeners, that was a joke. I would not pirate anybody's games. Full stop.
Yes. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, and the guy talked like a mile a minute. He was extremely energetic, and I can definitely see where the whimsy and the sense of humor in their game comes from, because he's definitely driving it.
Little known fact, they actually don't use water to make their coffee at Obsidian. They use Jolt.
Could be.
I thought that you were going to say that they just drained this guy's essence and put that into the coffee maker. And here is the Crystal Chamber.
Keeping Jolt in business since 1998.
Isn't Jolt out of business, though?
Oh.
See, that's part of the secret. They're the only buyer, so the Jolt brewery is not in their basement.
It's a private license exclusive.
That's right. They have 3 taps at Obsidian. Hot, cold, Jolt.
Well, they are a Microsoft company, so that follows. Anyway, that's all I got to say. Mike, what about you?
I too have been watching a Netflix show. This one is called Delicious in Dungeon.
Oh my gosh, I love this anime.
Okay, so this time James and I have watched the anime. Brian, have you seen this anime?
I have not. It is on my list. I saw it pop up and I said, "Oh, that looks fun."
Okay.
Had to wish list.
Yeah.
It
And I
was
haven't watched it.
originally on my Geek Out, but I saw you putting on yours, Mike, and I'm like, nah, I want to talk about it with you.
Yeah, because this anime is stupid. I mean, it is really, really stupid, but it is the most delightful, amusing form of stupid. And it's admittedly formulaic, but it's a formula I don't mind watching. The
Mhm.
whole premise of this is that these adventurers were dungeoneering. They were in the lowest levels of the dungeon, and their highest powered mage got eaten by a dragon, and not before they got portaled out of the dungeon. So they're going back into the dungeon in order to recover one of the party members' sisters from the belly of this dragon. And of course, since they turned this whole operation around so quickly, they didn't provision up. So they meet this guy in the dungeon who says, no provisions? Well, no problem. I'll show you how to gather food while you're in the dungeon. And one of the characters saying, well, what do you mean? We're going to eat things that we find in the dungeon? Like, well, we're going to eat things we kill in the dungeon. Absolutely. And so they don't actually sound like that.
No, that's a pretty close approximation of the voices. Well done, Mike. I thought you were playing a clip. Really nice.
I would say I don't need this crap from you, but I desperately need this crap from you in my life. So it's really a cooking show about these monsters that they're facing, and then preparing their various parts in order to, separating the good from the bad. How do you make noodles from gel creatures or slime creatures that are attacking you? How do you
prepare
boil
a giant frog, after it's been killed and skinned?
right? And so, well, we gathered these herbs topside, or well, we have these vines that are growing here. If you skin them and then boil them and pare this part away, then it makes a fine starchy. And they're just making these amazing looking meals while one of the party members is perpetually always grossed out until she eats it and says, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing! I need more."
That's two of the things I love the most. One is it follows that anime trope of any cooking show where the end result or that they've meticulously prepared looks more delicious than anything in real life.
Yeah.
And I forget the character's name, the elf magic user, that she is continually grossed out.
Marcille. That's
Marcille, yes.
Marcille.
Her reactions. Okay, so I watched a couple episodes and I told Joy, you need to watch this with me. And while she's not the biggest anime fan, she has really enjoyed this series. And I think Marcel's reactions have just been the highlight for her.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and since she's, well, obviously you can cook it and eat it. Like, well, yeah, my skillet is made of adamantium. What about it?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you say that you have this mystical knife, but can it, can you pair roots with it? Like, it just doesn't.
I love him because he's a dwarf who doesn't care about the condition of his axe, but cares everything about his, super metal pan/wok that he carries on his back.
Yeah. So that show has just been...
And the fact that the most excited we see him get are when they found some wheat and some yeast. It's like, we can make bread!
Yeah. Yeah, the show is just a weird, goofy little delight. So I highly recommend.
Agreed.
The other major thing that has my attention for this Geek Out is PAX East. Hooray! I was able to go this year, which was actually really amazing for a lot of reasons. I know I go every year, but I was delighted to be up for going. There were a lot of highlights for this year. I was delighted that PAX East had awarded Geek at Arms a media badge, and I went on you guys' behalf. Hope you don't mind.
Thank you. I'll allow it.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to apply for one, it's right there, and my places are right here on the other side of the country. I don't know what's stopping you. And I did post a PAX report because there were just too many amazing things to put into either a podcast or a blog. So I'm just going to kind of split and talk about different things because there were so many amazing experiences this year. one that I cover both here and in the blog post is an indie game that's about to be released called Venture to the Vile, and it is a 3D rendered game, but it's set kind of like a 2D side-scrolling platformer. And this in itself isn't revolutionary. A lot of your 2D side-scrolling platformers are actually 3D rendered images. I mean, that's how they do a lot of their parallax scrolling, is it's 3D. They just only use 2 dimensions for the character interactions. But this one is interesting that you can actually travel to the background at certain points, so you can play the level depth as well as its height and its breadth. So that's kind of cool. But that mechanic on its own is kind of a boring thing. What's really cool is that this is set in an alternate history Victorian England, and it has a deliciously spooky, creepy vibe. And you're going into these spaces and battling these creepy, like almost Cthulhuian horrors. And as you do many times in these Metroidvania games, is once you defeat a monster, you gain some of its power. And if you're defeating horrific, inhuman creatures and getting some of their power, it changes you. Turns your normal, wimpy little punch into, oh my gosh, I have a horribly effective bone spike I can slash with, which is cool. But then when you're getting your tentacle whip and your, which is a part of your body, and the things that you use to get your double jump, you continually change yourself. So there is this kind of what are we doing to the human spirit as you progress through the game. I played 2 different demos of it, and I'm really encouraged. And I know that the final release is going to be coming out in Steam probably about the time that this podcast launches. But they're hoping that if they make big enough of a splash, they'll be able to go to other consoles like Switch, which I hope they do, because that's what I generally play on. And this year, I kind of took a different aspect of the PAX experience, because the PAX is just too big to do everything. I mean, it is just too big. And so you kind of choose what is your pleasure. And this year I really kind of dug into the pin trading community. And are either of you familiar with kind of how Disney pins work?
Yes.
I've read about it online, so I get the idea of what goes on.
So, they have official Penny Arcade pins available at PAX in the various PAXs, and you can buy a pack of pins, or you can get trade fodder online and just trade it out during the event. And so I spent some time at the trade boards and the spin a wheel and trade a pin for what you get, and actually wound up coming away with some really cool things and meeting some really cool people. And I'm not gunning for like, I need to get this absolute super rare pin. Like, there are properties that I like and properties that I don't know or care anything about. But kind of to get one of the pins that I really, 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 really wanted, somebody had said, oh yeah, I'd trade that for one of the Pokemon, a couple of the Pokemon pins that they have down at the Poke Play Labs, because there are some pins you buy and some pins you get for free by standing in line and playing a demo. And so I stood in line to get into the Pokemon line and played, believe it or not, played Pokemon for the first time in my life ever. I've never played this game. And I actually thought that it was a lot of fun, because my friend of ours, because I had the media badge, I had a spare badge, and there's a new minister on our district, and I was like, hey, do you want a free badge? And his eyes actually got like several times whiter and turned like very cartoony blue and had sparkles around them. And you mean for free? And I'm like, yeah, like, what can I pay you? Like, no, like, just here's the badge, you come to PAX. And he, like, the dude sparkled the whole day. It was amazing. But
So it's contagious.
Yeah,
I see.
well, PAX is contagious. I think that really PAX gave me a media badge, hoping that PAX is contagious because I continue to write about it on the blog and podcast about
No,
it.
I meant the glitter thing.
Well,
Yeah. Now we know who patient zero is.
but it was actually just kind of a fun thing getting into line and getting paired up with a fourth person and meeting a new it's always fun to meet line friends and then actually playing what is a pretty simple but really cool collectible trade game. And I never I should have figured Pokemon was fun, but I never knew that Pokemon was actually a lot of
The
fun.
reason they've made like 20 variations on it.
And then at the trade event I took the Pokemon pin and he wasn't there that day, so I have these Pokemon pins that next year I'm gonna get myself one of them Starfleet pins. But anyway,
Ooh.
yeah,
What did you call it? Line friends?
line friends. Yeah, that's what happens when you go to these cons, is that if you're there by yourself and you start up a conversation with somebody, then you people can become friends for like an hour.
I made a few of those at Texas Blade Show.
That I believe.
We're all in line to get something, and okay, what are you getting at this booth? Oh, I'm going to get this. Oh, excellent. Oh, yeah, and I was just over at this other place. Oh, what'd you get? And that's how it begins. And now we're best friends for
Right.
for 20 minutes.
Well, it's funny. Well, this is PAX. It's an hour. But it's kind of one of the funny things is that there have been times that, you make a line friend for, like, if you're standing in the main queue room, like if you get there like 2 hours early so that you could be one of the first into the expo hall, you could be talking with somebody for a good long while. And one year when my eldest kiddo came with me, like we kind of like really hit it off with this one young lady. We come back the next year and she's in the queue hall like 2 rows over, and we kind of make the eye contact and we kind of point at each other and like, hey, we were doing this a year ago. Okay, well, maybe we'll see you around, but it's kind of a fun connection point because the PAX community really just has such a positive vibe for the people at the event. And I go into a bit of that in the blog post, but that's one of the things that makes PAX such the event that it is for me, that you're with so many thousand others of like your geeky people. And that's it for my geek out.
Then let's head to the film club. And Mike, since this was your idea, you explain what we're doing.
We are doing great adaptations. So we're going to be taking a look at some films which we thought were great adaptations from other works, from other forms of media. For our first one, we're going to be taking a look at Jurassic Park. And this, for those of you who did not know that there was a book before there was a movie, there was a book before there was a movie. And many of us read the book because we had already seen the movie. And I guess that brings us to the main question that we do anytime we do a film club. Why this movie? And I guess we have to start with the question, like, what do we mean when we say a great adaptation?
I think the first thing that people will jump on, and the thing that people will complain about a lot, is how closely a movie matches whatever it's being adapted from. And is that what we're meaning? Does it have to match the book?
I mean, for me, no, because stories can work well in their own medium while not being particularly good in another medium. And the book was, while it was fine in the book, if we have endless screen time of the T-Rex having this uncanny, relentless pursuit of Grant, like he has sniffed his tasty meats and he must chase him all over the park so that he may eat him and Lex and the annoying, much younger little boy. Like in the book, the T-Rex leaves a fresh kill. There is a hunking pile of huge meat, which it felled to go chase Grant for who knows what reason. That would have, being too faithful would have made the movie worse.
Well, when you think about it, then Michael Crichton was straight up stealing from Peter Pan, because it's like the crocodile who wants another piece of Captain Hook and just wants more of that tasty hookness and follows him forever. So, I mean, now we find out that Crichton's a hack and
Yeah.
totally stole from a Disney film.
Pretty much.
That's exactly what
This
happened.
is just a ripoff of Disney.
For my money, a good adaptation needs to preserve what makes the source material good, but it has to accommodate the new medium. And Spielberg knows better than pretty much anyone else what's going to work in film.
Yeah.
I talked about that a lot when we talked about Ready Player One. You know, watching the protagonist play joust with a lich would have been terrible cinema.
I mean, say that to an esports aficionado, and no, joust would even make terrible.
Yeah,
esports.
I don't think
Yeah.
joust is
No,
gonna make the cuts.
no.
So I think it needs to hew closely enough that it preserves the spirit of the source material, and something can be a great movie without being successful at doing that. Like Blade Runner, for instance, I don't think is a great adaptation of Dick's work. At least is not as good as Jurassic Park is of Crichton's. But you'll never hear me say that it wasn't a great film.
Yeah. When I was thinking about great adaptations, I'd actually thought about Blade Runner, and I really think that you pointed out something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I think that Blade Runner was a great movie, and it was inspired by Philip K. Dick's work, but I'm not sure it qualifies as an adaptation any more than Ponyo would qualify as an adaptation of The Little Mermaid. As it was kind of loosely inspired by and became great on its own grounds.
We had 3 original Jurassic Park films, and in recent years we've had 3 Jurassic
Unoriginal ones.
World year. But they're great and people love them because Chris Pratt and all that nonsense. But
I've not seen them. I can't comment really.
I haven't either. But they're making like loads of money. So we would not have had any of those subsequent films if we had gotten a more faithful adaptation of the novel.
Yeah.
Like pretty much everybody, I can remember reading the book after the movie came out. And reading the book because I had seen the movie. And I was amazed by how much more brutal. Brutal is about the only word I can think of that the novelization is.
There's a lot of guts in there. There's a lot of guts.
Yeah, I had forgotten. I read the book originally, actually as an assignment in high school before I saw the movie. And I had forgotten that first thing where the compies are sneaking into nurseries.
Oh, yeah.
And how graphic that, oh my.
Yeah.
Mike, I like how you
did not remember this.
I like how you put on the notes that you didn't have the audiobook, but you tend not to sleep well to the sound of guts. And I was like, well, some people find the sound of Hammond being slowly consumed by a pack of consumptionists to be quite soothing.
That's because justice soothes everyone, except for Hammond.
Yeah.
If you're Hammond, justice won't soothe you. That's the moral of the story in the book. Don't be Hammond.
Yes, we'll get to him later.
There was something on the tip of my tongue and I've lost it now.
It's because a compy ate it. I mean, come on.
Yeah, probably. And our usual question of why we're picking a particular movie. And I want to point out on this one that Jurassic Park is very, very important in terms of visual effects history. There are other films that kind of led the way toward the use of CG, and they take it a step at a time, but this was the one that really proved to Hollywood and the whole world that this was a new way of making movies, and it completely transformed the industry since then.
Yeah, that is, I don't think that we can overstate exactly that point, but even apart from its technical achievement, I don't think that the special effects are what made this movie great. They were a part of
exactly.
it. Like, would the movie have suffered if we only had stop motion? We could only speculate. But George Lucas once said, with a straight face even, a special effect is a tool, a means of telling the story. A special effect without a story is a pretty boring thing. And
then he embraced the dark side.
I don't know what happened. Yeah.
He surrounded himself with a lot of people who didn't know how to tell him no about things.
Yeah.
I just remembered what I was going to say about the brutal nature of the book versus the movie is there were several places where the visual effects artists were told no blood. Okay, yes, the Tyrannosaur is going to tear apart. It's going to kill these velociraptors. And they're saying, okay, well, we're going to cut down the blood. We know Spielberg doesn't really want this to be brutal. And the notes were coming back, says, no pool of blood, no blood on the teeth, no blood. Like, okay, well, that's the way we're going then. So
we'll just have Timmy say, look at all the blood.
Right. Just going to see it in his reaction.
I mean, which is fair. We'll get to the characters' reactions a little bit later, but yeah, I think that it's fair to say that there were a lot of things that made this film great. I mean, it was a great, just well-paced, thrilling blockbuster. It's good for a watch and a rewatch. And the things that they changed were good for the movie. They rearranged a lot of reveals, condensed characters. They changed characters to give them an on-screen character development. They cut out subplots just to make a well-paced, thrilling action adventure where a pop-up of the book would just not have been that.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very, very close to being a perfect film, in my opinion. There's very, very few things that I would change.
It's been quite a few years since I've watched it.
I watched it twice for this. You're killing me, James.
But upon viewing it recently, I found that I still enjoyed so much.
Yeah.
Fun storytelling, believable characters, a lot of the effects, not all, but many of the effects still hold up. It made me smile. It brought back a lot of those feels that I'd had when I saw it back in the early 90s. So many times you can say it with, especially when you have like a film trilogy or a movie with so many sequels, that the first one was best. It's a no-brainer. Out of all the subsequent films, the first one is absolutely the best.
Mm-hmm. Well, shall we move on into the film craft?
Oh, craft, we've got quite a lot. First thing on our list is music. And what can be said? I mean, Spielberg himself stated that John Williams makes any movie better.
Mm-hmm.
And while Jurassic Park would have been memorable just for the dinosaurs, his score elevated the film to a whole nother level.
Go ahead.
I'd actually stack this score up against any piece of music, whether it was made for a movie or not.
Yeah.
It is beautiful and moving. Yeah. And just watching an orchestra play it will bring me to tears.
Agreed.
So
agreed.
Good.
Yeah. There are a lot of films that I will say this is an amazing soundtrack, and I'll listen to the soundtrack apart from it, and it just doesn't carry it. But this is a soundtrack that I will still listen to over and over again just because it's good to listen to.
We have several examples of movies where the score is better than the actual movie itself. I was listening to a recent episode of the Retro Rewind where they were reviewing The Last Starfighter. The score for that movie is one of my absolute favorites. It's still a fun movie. It's just that the score is better. And for Jurassic Park, in my opinion, the movie is great. And for me to consider that the score is still better than the movie speaks worlds about the music itself.
The music really, on one level, appropriately in the film, carries this proud triumph of the human spirit, and also so much carries the emotional weight of, oh no, everything went horribly wrong, to even the abject horror of some of these encounters.
Come on, we can make it. No, we can't. Why?
No.
We're being hunted. That is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. It's just a small moment. We're being hunted. And Ellie Sadler's, the look on her face is just of the realization of what is happening settling in. Yeah, so good.
This is also one of the things I gotta mention, that John Williams seldom uses synthesizers, and you never even notice when he's using synthesizers in the film, because it so adds to, like, it's usually a thing that would take me out of the film and I would notice. But in this film, he just so integrates the mood of what we're hearing with the visuals so well. I think it's really part of what sells this film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the fact that the music can be as powerful as it is and yet still not overwhelm the film,
yeah,
it's a master class.
I'm adding a quick note to music or to Filmcraft because I believe this needs to be included in the creation of the sound effects for this film. Everyone's always wondered, what did dinosaurs sound like? And the sound and effects crew didn't just have that job of how do we make a dinosaur sound believable, but how do we make it sound good? How do we make it sound impressive and believable? And I thought they did a great job. We don't see a lot of dinosaurs, which is an ongoing joke during the tour. We get to hear the Brachiosaurus, and I think the most memorable of all of them is, of course, the T-Rex roar. It made me sad because I loved the Tyrannosaurus Rex roar, which they never used again in any other movies. It was loud, blaring, like 100 trumpets going off right in your face, along with a lion and an elephant. It was a sound that I described as majestically terrifying.
Yeah.
Which is what a T-Rex is. Now, some people are like, oh, no, it wasn't. They made it this way, and that wouldn't have been how they really sounded. But I don't care.
Like they cheated so many ways science-wise in this film. Like
exactly.
That's the tip of the iceberg.
My personal preference was I loved how he sounded or how she sounded in this movie because they're all girls. But overall, how they made everything sound. The Dilophosaurus having like bird noises and the scream that the raptors had when they went charging after something. Semi-believable and terrifying. So, thumbs up from me.
Well, shall we then, if we're already talking about effects in terms of sound, shall we talk about visual effects? And cue Brian.
And I'm going to chew up a lot of time here. Hope that's okay.
I mean,
take it away. You are the resident expert.
I was kind of looking forward to this for exactly this reason, so...
Tell us about aspect ratios.
Actually, I think the aspect ratio thing was Mike's
That
notes.
one was mine.
But I could talk about texturing. So one of the problems with doing CG prior to this was you had to make your model, and you've got this, what they call a pelt. You kind of unwrap the model so that you can go to this 2D space. It's like cutting a flap of skin and then just peeling everything off of the body so that you can flatten it all out like some crazed serial killer.
I was saying, the raptors did that.
Yeah, you paint the textures on that. And what they did for this was they developed a way where they could just kind of take a photo of the model in a particular pose from a particular camera and then paint directly onto it. And ILM tested the concept on Death Becomes Her, but it was really developed for Jurassic Park. And so they're painting directly onto the 3D model instead of this unwrapped UV pelt.
That very much sounds like studio logic. We invented this new technology for a very large budget special effects movie. Let's test it on a smaller movie first.
Yeah. And that's exactly what they did with Death Becomes Her. They tested a lot of their tracking stuff and the texturing because they had this thing where like, we know this isn't going to look photorealistic. It's not supposed to. Death Becomes Her is a comedy film. Mm-hmm. And so we can get by with having experimental technology on this and just small things because we've got our sights on something that's going to really, really need it. And the plan wasn't even for ILM to do the hero dinosaurs. They were only going to do stuff in the background. And Phil Tippett's crew was going to do all stop motion and puppets for the ones that are close to camera. And ILM painted the T-Rex, animated it, and surprised Spielberg with a close-up in order to bid for a bigger slice of the work. They had not been commissioned to do this. They made a sequence of the T-Rex full frame roaring at the camera just to prove, hey, we can do this. And that caused Spielberg to say, hey, yeah, let's rearrange the way we're going to do this movie.
That caused some other things in the studio as well.
I imagine so, yeah. And there's still an awful lot of Tippett and Winston, the practical dinosaur artists and puppeteers. I counted up the credits, and I think there's like 3 times as many puppeteers as there are CG artists. So there's still an awful lot of work there. They weren't necessarily taking a whole lot of it away.
That's one of the things that was really interesting about Phil Tippett's expertise. Like I love Phil Tippett's work. One of the things that they had done in order to properly animate these things in the 3D space. They built what is essentially like a miniature motion capture rig model for the T-Rex that had all of these little sensor inputs to it, and it looked kind of like you would expect maybe like a Harryhausen like internal frame to look for before they put all the rubber
Mhm.
skin on it. And so Phil Tippett would be doing the puppetry of like, oh, this is where this would be in this frame and this frame and this frame. So his stop motion animation skills are very much a part of this movie.
Yeah, and you don't throw away that kind of expertise. You've got somebody
No.
who's skilled at animating monsters. You find a way to apply that knowledge, all of that years and years of training and knowledge to your CG. And so, yeah, the ability to transfer that data from a physical puppet into your 3D armature is very, very valuable. We don't see that too much anymore because I don't think we have puppeteers who can do it. I think maybe Leica may still do that kind of thing, but now that's a very much a dying art these days. And by the way, the VFX supervisor for Jurassic Park is a name that we've tossed around before. It was Dennis Muren,
Oh,
who
yeah.
was one of the guys that invented morphing for Willow.
Okay.
There's an interesting point where Carolyn Rendu had a fascinating role in the development of the special effects in this film, didn't she?
Yeah, she was. I'm trying to remember what she was doing before this. She was already a painter. I think she was a concept artist, and somebody had shown her the T-Rex tests, and she says, "Ooh, can you teach me to do that?" And so I was like, "Okay, sure." We don't have anybody else who knows it. This is literally we've invented it for this movie, so it's not like you're taking taking a seat from somebody else. so so she just kind of invented the process, this new texturing approach. And so she painters work from reference, and they already had all of these models that Tippett and Winston were building. And so she says, okay, well, I need to be able to see what I'm going to match. And so they just brought the whole model into her office, the full scale. She says like 13 feet, and said, here, paint it.
Oh my gosh.
And she had like a post-it that she would stick on the model, and she's like, this is the part that I'm painting. I'm just going to start from this corner so that she can keep track of where she's painting on the model, because she's just got this white wireframe in the software, and it doesn't have anything that gives her landmarks to the physical model. So she has this post-it note she's moving around. Like, okay, well, these are the scales that I'm working on. Or they didn't do scales in Jurassic Park, the skin texture that I'm working on, so that the CG models are going to exactly match the physical models. And you can't tell when they switch from one to another, because like in the kitchen scene, when the raptors first come through the door, those are the puppets.
Right.
But obviously when it jumps up onto the counter, that's the CG model. And you can't tell where it goes from one to the other, except in there's a kind of a character to the motion from the animatronics, where there's like a little bit of a wiggle when it stops. And that's the only thing really to me that gives it away when you're looking at one versus the other.
That's kind of like, I hate to deviate from the notes too much, but this is, I gotta say, this is one of the things that really sells this film, is that there is this integration of the puppetry, the animatronics, the CG. Like you're not trying to sell the audience on CG. You're trying to sell the audience on this creature. And this creature
dinosaurs.
is
Yeah.
done in so many different ways for however it works best for the scene, which is just fantastic.
About the only time that the effects looked dated was when they were in the Jeep, and they're like, look, we gotta go now. And behind them, coming crashing through the trees, is the T-Rex, and you get that highly entertaining chase scene taken from various different angles. That was the only time that he just looked a bit off. But then again, I'm watching it on like a newer 4K TV, and that could also 4K TVs kind of tend to highlight older style CGI.
Well, and that's actually a scene that I'd like to talk about too, because I do not know how they did that and the Stampede, because there's something that you have to do when you're doing CG work is
with the Gallimimus?
yeah, you have to make a replica of your physical camera in the software, and it has to move the same way that the physical camera did, have the same lensing, all of that. And we have a lot of software now that can solve a 3D camera move and make that matching happen, but they did not have that at this point. And these shots would be difficult to do today. I mean, there's not a whole lot of information because it's moving so fast, and it's dark and rainy in the T-Rex chase. This would have been difficult to accomplish even with all the technology we have right now. And yet they did it at the very beginning of CG, of these CG characters.
Well, that's Spielberg's secret. This isn't a work of fiction. He actually found it cheaper to create genetic dinosaurs and just put them in certain scenes because they were so hard to control.
Funny thing, Spielberg actually, if I remember correctly, introduced rain into one of the scenes to try as a cheat to get around one of the difficulties that they were having in texturing. So that for the 3D model of the early 3D models tend to have this waxy, rubbery look.
Right.
They don't very well capture the fact that skin tends to absorb and reflect different amounts of light based on the depth, and there's all manner of things that makes somebody look like they have skin. And CG just did not do that well. And so he said, well, fine, just make it rainy and make it wet. So if there's any waxy, reflecty sheen on it, then it just looks wet. And it's like that worked phenomenally in that film, or in that particular shot.
And that's actually one of the secrets to cinematography is if you want to make something look expensive, make it rain. If there's water on the ground, that's instant production value. It just makes everything look great. And yeah, and it does hide things in CG because this was very, very early and they didn't have things. The effect you're describing earlier is called subsurface scattering, where the light enters the skin, bounces around inside, and then exits somewhere else. And that's what causes, like if you put a flashlight behind your hand and you can see the red light bleeding through. It happens at a much smaller scale all the time, and that's what makes skin look like skin. And that simply didn't exist in the materials at that point in time. So yeah, hide it in darkness, hide it in wet. But our first look at the dinosaurs
was in
and I think daylight. This was so gutsy. Yeah, it was full screen, full daylight, bright sunshine. It's like, you don't do that.
Unless you're Spielberg.
And that was a flex. Totally, 100%.
As Alan Grant vocalized what all of us were saying, it's a dinosaur.
Yeah. And lest I spend too much time on the CG and fail to give props to Stan Winston and Phil Tippett more, Winston pushed his own tech forward quite a bit too with his practical animatronics. So you've got the shell that goes around the armature, and on most puppets, everything prior to this point, it's just like a series of hoops. And you get this thing that happens where if you've got like a long tail and you've got all these hoops around the armature, when the tail bends, the skin kind of folds up in between the hoops, and it looks just weird. And so what he did was he developed this thing where he took like this continuous strip of steel and just round it in this spiral all the way down the tail, so that when it flexes, when it twists and turns, instead of the skin folding up, it folds and stretches in a more realistic fashion. And it preserves the volume and lets the skin slide across it more persuasively. The only problem that they had with it was that it turned out to be very, very difficult to get like the skin to stretch. They had to have like 4 or 5 guys pulling on this thing, like trying to pull on a gigantic rubber sock that is like very, very tight against the armature. So there's some pictures of that of the crew trying to get the tail and the T-Rex. It was kind of entertaining.
You said you've got to give them props, and I've got nothing but praise for the undoubtedly backbreaking work they put in on these physical dinosaurs. Those were my favorite parts of the rewatch. The large-scale physical Tyrannosaurus Rex, the raptors, the headshot we got of the Brachiosaurus, still absolutely gorgeous. They're the fact that they were, especially the T-Rex, make it look so expressive. And those were the parts that's like, wow, I actually feel like I'm looking at a dinosaur right now.
And everybody loves watching Sam Neill lean against that
The Triceratops. Oh my gosh,
Oh
yes.
my gosh, yeah.
We all wished we were him at that moment.
Right. Well, this isn't special effects, but I do think that there is something that's noteworthy about the film craft, and that's the aspect ratio. One of the things that was really brilliant about this film is that it was shot in 1.85 to 1, which people are looking at me like, yeah, so what do those numbers mean? And it means it's about 80% more vertical space than you see in a film like Star Wars. Star Wars has this wonderful, for those of you who grew up on old style TVs like they had when this movie came out, you would have a letterbox edition where you have the black bars at the top and bottom. But this film is a lot taller than the letterbox or widescreen experience. And the narrower or taller aspect ratio is a really shrewd choice for this film, because you get these scenes that allow you to pan up and feel the enormity of some of these creatures in respect to the human scale. Like the Apatosaurus scene at the beginning, when you get your first full look at the dinosaur, would not have had the same impact if you didn't have that experience of seeing so much of the height at once. So it made those grand enormity scenes so much more impactful when you had this aspect ratio, rather than having to pan up or zoom out to get as much of the experience.
And ironically, it makes for a more intimate look at the human characters, because you can have their faces filling more of the screen that way. When you go widescreen, you're compressing that vertical, and you have so much more stuff on the sides, and so you get more often 2 shots and 3 shots instead of the full frame of this is somebody's face reacting to something. You couldn't have pushed in on Grant the same way in his reaction as you did here if you were shooting in, I think, was it 2.35 to 1, which is what most films are.
And this human reaction, I think, is one of the things that is so grounding in this film. We'll take another look at that reveal scene. Before we see dinosaurs, we see that the actors see dinosaurs. And judging by the expressions on their face, like, it is so believable that they are seeing something so breathtakingly awe-striking. And this film just keeps doing it every step of the way. The human moments and the human grounding sells the dinosaurs.
I mean, they are us. I mean, they are reacting in the way that we know that we would react if we ever found ourselves just a few hundred feet away from a creature from thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
A giant brachiosaurus munching away at a tree, going about its day. Yet to us, it would be a life-changing experience.
Life-changing. It would be a pants-changing experience, sir. I mean, Timmy's in the car saying, I threw up. And Grant, I'm sure there's a missing line that says, that's okay. I peed myself. I'm pretty sure your sister did a number 2. Like, it's.
I wish Hammond had told us to pack the brown pants.
Well, shall we talk about our characters?
We shall. Speaking of Hammond.
Yeah, let's talk about them characters. All right, we're not going to go into all the details on how the book was different, but I gotta say, this character was the most different between the two mediums. In the book, he was egotistical, manipulative. He was an egomaniac who never owned up to his mistakes. He was delusional in his vision, and he's quick to blame everybody but himself when things weren't going right. And it almost made you glad when he got eaten.
Almost? I was quite glad when he got eaten. The film's Hammond starts much the same, but he at least shows himself capable of admitting his missteps eventually. I wonder if he's really learned anything by the end. I think he's just going to turn around and make the same mistakes again.
I think that there is a line in there where he says, "I've chosen not to endorse your park," and he says, "So have I," and they run away, which at least gives some feeling. Like, there was a scene when he was talking with Ellie, is like, here's what I can do better next time, and Ellie's like, people are dying, like, as in, like, there can't be a next time. We can't dream like this. And yeah, I don't know if he actually legit learned his lesson at the end, but I hope that movie Hammond learned.
I watched this movie with my daughter. After it was over, she was asking me some questions. She's old enough to know that there's more in movies than just the stereotypical good guys and bad guys. And she found it interesting that, there were people who were both looked at as good guys and bad guys who all died and got et up. And she said that, she was happy that Ned especially got chomped. And she was saying that so much could have been avoided if he hadn't messed with the computers and made the system go down. But she felt that Hammond was to blame as well, and she was having a hard time articulating it. And I was proud of her for realizing that.
Yeah.
I said, well, sweetie, a lot of this could be laid at his feet. I mean, he had a really cool idea to create a park of dinosaurs. The problem is his method of going about it was incredibly selfish, very narrow-minded. This is a gentleman who, once he's got in his head something is the right way to go, then that's the way it is. I missed this as a kid, but when he shows up at the dig site at the beginning and he wants them to come look at his park, for my insurance companies, I'd like you to come and look at it and maybe even, put pen to paper and give it an endorsement. And in return, I'll fund your dig for 3 years. As a kid, that seemed perfectly acceptable.
As an adult, like, I'm going to buy your vote.
Yeah, adult, I'm like, that's just a tad unethical. And he keeps sliding down the scale from
Isn't
there.
that just how YouTube works, though? I think Hammond kind of represents a lot of what we see, with research now, that he is looking to do research in order to make a lot of money, where the more responsible thing to do is to do the research, learn stuff, figure out how to make the money with it later, but we need to understand what we're doing first. And he wanted to skip straight to the end. And I think we're seeing the same kind of thing with like the AI. It's like, OpenAI didn't bother figuring out, okay, what's the ethical thing to do? What's the responsible thing to do? We're going to skip right to making the money.
Yeah.
And let the whole rest of the world deal with the consequences.
He just saw it all as we can have groundbreaking research and cutting edge facilities and theme parks all at the same time. And he does literally that.
Yeah. A friend of mine did scientific research for nonprofits. And he said that there was a gulf of difference between the research done for nonprofit, for public consumption of our findings, and for the more lucrative privatized scientific research. And that plays very much into the themes of the opening of the prologue, which I can't get into. I don't have the time. But I think that it is definitely part of Hammond's character, absolutely, that he's in this for the profit. Even one of the things the book does is it shows from the very beginning, the reveals are very different. This whole plan of Hammond's doesn't work. You eliminate Nedry from the picture, things are still falling apart. Yeah. And they're just being patched together and kept along. It doesn't go critical, but it's not going well. At least I think that the movie Hammond is still caught up in the idealism of I can share this with the world.
Yeah, and that's the big difference between the two characters. The movie's Hammond is an idealist. The book's Hammond is a profiteer.
He's a music man. He is a high dollar charlatan.
Yeah.
And both need to have a ruler taken to their knuckles by OSHA.
Well, that was actually a line in the book that he located the park where he did on this island off Costa Rica specifically to get away from OSHA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not surprised at all. I kept thinking some proper guidelines and quality control could solve so much of this, and by so much of this, I mean prevent so much death. Like all the
Oh,
death.
but we spared no expense.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. He spared no expense, but that's the problem is that when you really look at it, he absolutely spared the expense.
That was what was driving Nedry's
Yeah.
betrayal, that he didn't want to pay more.
Well, he didn't want to pay more. Also, the fact that he hired someone like Nedry to make such an automated system to begin with. So it would all be automated, and he would have to pay fewer workers.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he incorporated a ride into the facility that would house the storage of the embryos, the hatchery, the genetic experiment, all of that was all together, just kit bashed. So yeah, he absolutely spared the expense.
And also those safety restraints didn't really restrain anybody.
No, not one bit.
I don't know if that was supposed to be foreshadowing, but let's pretend that it is.
The spared no expense line wasn't for everyone else. He was just continually trying to convince himself, I'm sparing no expense. I'm sparing no expense. I got all of the parts for this from IKEA. I spared no expense.
Yeah, I think that the spared no expense is something that he wanted to sell, not do. Well, he did spare no expense when it came to the luxury.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so make it luxurious. Make all the gourmet meals. Make sure that all of the accommodations are top notch, but then do what we need to do with the rest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Ellie points something out, that he's got highly poisonous plants everywhere, but he's got them there because they look pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back, I don't remember the book, but in the movie itself, this bothered me as a kid. It bothered me today. We never find out what was making the Triceratops sick.
Oh, it's in the book. It's absolutely in the book.
Yeah.
Inform me and the listeners, because I am not going to go back and read the book.
Well, I'm not going to spend all my time on the podcast on the differences with the book. I said so at the beginning. Okay, I'll do it this one more time.
Yeah, you're going to do it this one time, though. You absolutely are.
It's because the Triceratops has a gizzard and it needs rocks in order to populate the gizzard to crush up what it's eating. And so when it eats the rocks, what it's doing is getting some of the lilac berries incidentally, consuming them, and only getting sick in cycles based on when it needed to refresh its gizzard rock supply.
And it didn't need to resupply its rocks, and that's why she didn't find any in its scat in the movie. Okay.
Right. It's
Gotcha.
because it had just consumed it.
Yeah. I really would have been happy if they had wrapped up that little mystery, just for everyone like me who is incredibly concerned about the sick Triceratops. So basically, everyone in the theater.
That was Crichton's sly way of making people buy a copy of the book.
Devil. Anyway, back to characters.
Let's talk about Alan Grant.
AKA Dino Daddy.
At the beginning, he's kind of made to be unlikable by the way he treats the loudmouth kid in order to justify his reaction to Timmy. And this was one thing that I really liked from the book that I wish hadn't changed, because Crichton's original Grant completely geeked out over Timmy's dino fever. This was his same experience. He was excited about dinosaurs when he was a kid, so he became a paleontologist. He sees a kid excited about dinosaurs, he should be all over that kid saying, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That would have been a perfect moment in the theater when Timmy walks up to him like, I read your book. You're like, really? And then gets down on his knees, gets eye to eye level with him and says, tell me what you liked. That'd have been great.
And that would have been far more in keeping with the character from the book.
Agreed.
I think that it was meant to be a character development of somebody who's not good with kids to somebody who's working well with the kids in the survival situation. I think it was supposed to be character growth, and I like that idea of having character growth to, not good with kids to de facto guardian. I just don't think it was terribly fleshed out all that well in the final product.
And it wasn't, he went from, do you really want to have kids? They're gross, they're annoying, they're loud, they're smelly, to becoming like the best father figure ever in the way that he is treating the kids and the way he's talking to them and comforting them. There's no real progression. It goes from one to the other fairly quickly.
Yeah, it's a matter of, he's our hero character. He needs an arc. Here's his arc. That's enough, right?
Like, okay, he's not good with kids. Now he's good with kids. Arc complete.
I did like the moments where he kind of had to keep reining Tim in, which for someone who was almost eaten by a T-Rex and thrown in a car into a tree, the boy copes really well. And we'll talk about him in a moment, but they're watching the scene with the Gallimimus, and it's getting eaten by a T-Rex, and he's looking at it, and we see from his expression, there's so much blood. And then Hammond comes back on screen, puts his arm around him, picks him up, carries him off.
Now, let's talk about Tim. Yeah, he copes really well.
I think it's funny how much of the scientific exposition he delivers, because you have to give this to the audience somehow. And, it's really easy to have the scientists do it, but it's kind of hilarious that it's this little kid just spouting off all of this knowledge and giving us the things like, oh, they think they died out from a disease, but this other guy says it was a big meteor, which, by the way, that was a brand new theory at this point. Well, newly accepted as a workable theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that one had been floating around for years, but actually having some not concrete, but believability to it was more recent at that time.
Having all this iridium on the KT boundary,
Right. Well, and actually, I was about to say that astrophysicist I mentioned earlier has a video on physics crackpots, and she describes the guy that came up with this idea. He's like, by all the hallmarks, this guy sounds like a crackpot. He's making theories about it in a field that he's not familiar with, and he's doing this and that. It's like, but in every case, he was right. And he was the one who originally said, hey, we noticed there was a lot of iridium. I proposed that there was a meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs. And if we dig down and find iridium, then I'm right. And they did that, and they found the iridium, and he was right. And everybody said, nah. And it took another 15 years before they finally acknowledged that he was correct.
See, it's interesting because Jurassic Park came out in 1993. By 1995, when I was taking paleontology courses, the meteor theory was there were other theories that were like, yeah, but it's probably the meteor.
Mm-hmm. The book was written in 1990, so it had a couple of years. It was published in 1990. It was probably written in 88, 89.
I do like this idea, though, of the kid being the one doing the exposition, because I think in some ways, and maybe this is just very 10-year-old boy fascination with dinosaurs, but when I was a kid, I would devour any dinosaur book I could get my hands on. And the Chicago Field Museum was my temple of fun, having all of these massive skeletons on display. I don't know. I just think that was something that I kind of identified with. That's a young me.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think Grant should have identified with it too.
Yeah,
agreed.
I think it's also interesting that Dr. Backer that Timmy mentions was a scientific advisor on the movie, probably the inspiration for Dr. Grant. And he also happens to be a Pentecostal minister.
It's funny that Timmy says, I read your book, and I can remember Robert Backer, well-known paleontologist. I think I actually did read some of his book. He did one back in the 80s called The Dinosaur Heresies. Instead of relating with Dr. Grant, I'm finding myself relating more with Timmy.
I think that one of the things I do have to say about Timmy, there is one scene where he is worse than useless. And it's because you have this kid who's just jumping up and down beside his sister, who's using a computer while Grant is reaching for a shotgun. So easy, hey, Timmy, if you're not doing anything over there, could you, I don't know, pass me the gun
over here, please?
Just don't touch the trigger, just kind of slide it on over in my direction just a few inches, and I've got it from there.
Well, in his defense, he had just been electrocuted by, what was it, the sign that we see repeatedly, 10,000 volts.
Okay.
And so it's basically Chekhov's electrical fence. So they posted how much voltage is going through that. So obviously someone is going to get hit by it. And then went and got hopped up on sugar. So,
and then they put a 3D video game in front of him and he was just lost.
Exactly. So, he's in Timmy land at this point. Dinosaurs are the least of his worries.
Okay. Screen time is ruining our children, that bandwagon.
Yes.
Fine.
Although without screen time, then Lex would not have been able to do what she did somehow, and they would all have been dead.
Unix, I know this. And then we see something that looks nothing like Unix.
Strangely enough, it actually was. It was a custom built system that they were using for the film, but it was built on a Unix platform, but it became such a huge joke that it didn't look like anything like the Unix systems that we were exposed to that were like, this is obviously stupid, but apparently it wasn't. Even though it was kind of stupid, it should at least
I've got
look
to
like the Unix system.
scroll the mouse over a large area of the screen like I'm gliding in on the box of files I want.
Oh, come on.
And we saw nothing of that interface at any other point in the movie.
I mean, she was using a 386, so you got to give her some credit.
That's because Nedry had it minimized because even he realized that it was stupid.
Right.
Let's talk about Lex then. I mean, so long as we're talking about what Lex is doing is stupid. I mean, it's right there.
Well, in the book, they had the kids' ages swapped.
Yeah.
So Lex was mostly just the plot device to create situations.
She was the worst written character in this whole
she was
book.
Terrible. But the movie's version I like much better.
Yeah.
I don't care much for the teen hacker archetype.
Mm-hmm.
See Retro Rewind episode 176.
You guys have said it 3 times. You've said the words 3 times. You're gonna make them come on the show again.
I thought it was going to be like Beetlejuice and Francisco was going to appear in my apartment, but it didn't happen.
Terribly sorry. Just like on Retro Rewind.
Now that's 4. I did enjoy how so much of the bad luck kept happening to her. Besides the fact that she almost gets eaten a lot. It just, the one moment she's like, okay, maybe this dinosaur isn't so bad. I'll try to pet it. I'll reach out, and she gets sneezed on. Just gross. I mean, I've had my dog fart right next to me, and getting sneezed on by a brachiosaurus would be horrible. Getting farted on by a brachiosaurus, I'm fairly sure would kill her.
There are actually some studies, believe it or not, that I'm not going to go into on air.
We do not read the same studies, Mike.
Look, I told you that you can't open the book of a man's life in the middle and expect to get the whole story.
Wait, what did Kaja get her doctorate in?
Not related to dinosaurs. Are you trying to shame me this time? What's going on? Why didn't you bring the dinosaur expert on here? She was getting her doctorate of ministry in...
We're talking about a sci-fi movie, so if somebody has a doctorate, they have a doctorate in everything.
That's it. They have a doctorate in science. All right. This whole thing about the hacker thing, like I don't have any objection to the hacker teen. But the one thing that was kind of funny about the hacker thing is that the only thing that we ever saw her do was navigate an unfamiliar, to us anyway, user interface system and turn things on. Like, of course, a lot of the technological marvels in the book really didn't age well. Like, there are sections describing what a CD-ROM is. And they actually even made it into the movie like, oh, this has a CD-ROM, which I feel like the explanation is almost becoming justified again to people.
We've come full circle.
Right. This unfamiliar
technology. Explain what this is now. But the children were really mostly just a vehicle for having danger and precarious situations. So
amping the tension. Amping the tension to those that we attach as more vulnerable.
Yeah. If the kids hadn't shown the light, the T-Rex would not have gone towards the car. Everyone would have stayed still until it moved on, and the lawyer would not have gotten eaten.
If the lawyer had...
Jurassic Park would have opened up and thousands of other people would have died.
Right.
Yeah.
So really, in reality, Nero's the hero.
I was going to say that Dennis Nedry is the hero, because if he hadn't been this sneaky, duplicitous guy that he was, then, the park would have opened and disaster would have ensued. So Dennis Nedry is the hero that we needed, apparently.
In a deleted scene in the newer movie Jurassic World, it's actually the Dennis Nedry server farm. And that's his little plaque on the front, which also, what you just stated, Brian, happens in Jurassic World. They open the huge park, thousands of people show up, and a lot of them get eaten.
Mm-hmm.
I should definitely...
They didn't have Nedry.
Yeah. Speaking of Nedry, let's talk about that character. He is really, of all the characters, the most same in both stories. The only change happens in shortening the plot. Like in the book, things are already shown to not be terribly well under control. And in the book and in the movie, well, in the movie, things are generally under control until he lights the fuse that blows the entire powder keg. But really in the book, he's just kind of the catalyst for things going completely off the rails.
Yeah. And he's not likable. He's not supposed to be likable. When he dies, we're all happy.
Especially the dinosaur was happy. He got a snack.
They're
Yeah.
very happy.
Although I'm worried about that Dilophosaurus's cholesterol now after eating someone like Dennis. I mean, we
Yeah, he's
really
gonna
need to
need
get
to
him in, get a cholesterol,
Take a few more laps.
LDL test, just make sure that he's okay.
Like, that's the thing, though. Does human meat have, like, the good cholesterol or the bad cholesterol?
What's that dinosaur's blood sugar like now?
Well, I mean, really, here's another thing that they've never approached in this film is that these creatures are ostensibly 65 million years apart. We have absolutely no idea what human proteins are going to do to the digestive systems of these dinosaurs. This whole place could be a wreck in 24 hours.
Well, they're just happy for some fresh
speaking.
meat because in an effort to spare no expense, he spared expense and just ordered 200 metric tons of kibbles and bits.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, they're going to be airdropping kibbles and bits on this place. All right. Can we talk about Dr. Ellie Sattler?
Let's.
Yeah. Why did they make her and Grant a couple? It makes no sense to me because it does not serve the plot for them to be a couple.
I think they had a check mark on the screenwriter's list, and they had, okay, romantic subplot.
So
wait, Grant and Ellie, check.
So are you saying that paleontologists can't get women? Because come on, they're probably not pulling anyone as beautiful as Laura Dern, but
They are if they look like Sam Neill.
that's a good point.
I was in the paleontology department, and I did ask out a geology major on a date once. She was very gracious to say yes, and I will say, like, am I saying that paleontologists can't? I'm just I'm just not going to comment on what type of people paleontologists turn down.
Fair enough.
Okay.
What I found interesting was, and this touches back on what you said, Brian, that if she's a doctor of one thing, doctor of everything.
Oh, yeah.
How does a paleobotanist able to diagnose and treat a sick triceratops better than like the park vets, who apparently all he does is hang about, stare at the thing, and give her a ride?
Well, her qualifications come from having a title card.
Ah, yes.
She also seemed to be no stranger of the up to the shoulder glove. We're not going to investigate
found that kind of surprising too. Oh, that's an interesting skill that you developed. Picking up fossils.
My first major was in veterinary medicine. So
it's really no different than a buffalo or a cow.
Really?
Well, you can't open the book of her life in the middle
and expect to get the whole story. All right. Since we have that character, we can't not talk about Ian Malcolm. I just don't know what to say. I mean,
yeah.
It's Jeff Goldblum being Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah. I wonder how much he enjoyed that role. Because I
don't know. An awful lot of people have enjoyed giving photos of him in that bare-chested pose to each other as gag gifts.
See,
I think I saw someone give someone for like a white elephant gift a body pillow with that picture sprayed across the length of it. That is as glorious as it is terrifying. I'm really glad I didn't get it.
More than once I have posted the gif of Jeff Goldblum in that open shirt, but animated with him breathing deeply, with Grant with his head against his chest listening. And I have to say, whoever did that, I mean, you are an artist. Thank you. You've improved the quality of the world.
Yes, things like this are why the internet exists.
But the one thing about Malcolm that I kind of find frustrating, not about the character itself, but they kind of just vaguely mention chaos theory without really defining it. And from 1993 onward, there was this string of college students who did not understand chaos theory, not even a little bit, but because they saw Jurassic Park and they knew that Ian Malcolm was cool, chaos theory was cool, and so they would talk about it based on what they read on the internet. And the internet was in 1993 terms, and there wasn't a lot there either.
Ironically, I think that was also Michael Crichton's point with the character, was that chaos theory is not a thing. He described Malcolm as a rock star, and everybody was kind of denigrating his field.
I think the point is that Ian Malcolm also read it off of the internet in the early 1990s, but because no one else could understand anything about it, he sounded knowledgeable and like he knew what he was talking about.
Because dinosaurs
if you say
eat
it with
people.
authority, people will take you seriously.
Especially if you predict doom and gloom of dinosaurs eating people, which is apparently what they do. And they did, so you must be right about everything involving chaos theory.
And you have to be able to turn a phrase. Life finds a way.
Are there any other characters that we find particularly noteworthy? I mean, there were some wonderful characters in this film that had a lot, but there were a lot more characters in the book. I think they were wisely cut out, so we had a limited number of things to care about and a limited number of things to keep our attention. So
Gennaro existed to be eaten.
Yep. Muldoon existed there to be like, yeah, you're a huntsman.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then say,
if Muldoon had truly been, if I'd been him, sorry, boss, all of the velociraptors are dead again. But we just grew a new batch last week. Yeah, they're all dead. What happened? They fell on some shotgun shells. Weirdest thing. Keeps happening. Total mystery.
I do have to say that everybody loves the classic line, clever girl. So like,
clever girl.
Like, good for you, Muldoon. Glad you, like, that was your Admiral Akbar. It's a trap. You've had your moment that will live forever, whether you want it to or not.
And also
Sam Jackson's
hold on to your butts. People keep forgetting that he has a role in this movie. Like, oh yeah, Sam Jackson was in that movie.
Yeah. Does anybody remember the name of the character? Only seldom, but Samuel L. Jackson was definitely in that movie.
Yes. Well, I think that is going to wrap up the look at the characters. Was there any final thoughts on the movie?
I mean, I think that we could do an entire podcast for episodes and episodes and episodes and not exhaust the depths of this movie and this book. But I don't want to do that podcast.
Yeah, that sounds very boring to me.
Yeah. The Jurassic podcast, which I'm sure someone out there is probably doing, and much better. So we'll leave it to them. And that will take us to the zombie apocalypse plan of the week. Mike, are we surviving with the help of genetically engineered creatures from the past, or are we getting by on our lonesome?
I think that you've exactly hit the nail on the head. I mean, we just breed several thousands of those compies and set them loose on the perimeter, and they'll take care of the zombies.
What if they become zombies themselves from eating the zombie meat?
I think that we got a worse problem if they're eating the zombie meat. Is zombie meat high in lysine, or are they going to be coming after something else? Okay, so it's zombies and then soybeans, and then another perimeter fence to keep the zombie compies from coming after it.
It sounds like we're going to it sounds like we're going to need to make 2 trips to Lowe's.
We're going to need 2 trips, definitely 2 trips.
And on that note, that's going to wrap it up for us this episode. Thank you, as always, for listening in. Check us out online at the usual places, geekatarms.com, facebook.com/geekatarms. Mike, where else are we found online?
You can find us at Arms Geek on what's left of Twitter, and we can also take a look at what we're posting on Geek at Arms on Instagram and Blue Sky.
Don't forget to leave us a review. Give us a like. It really does help the podcast. And as always, from Brian, Mike, and James, be safe, be blessed, and be geeky.
Thanks for listening to Geek at Arms. Music for this podcast was provided by Incompetech.com. For more, check us out at Facebook.com/Geek at Arms. Give us a like and maybe even subscribe to us on iTunes. That would be awesome.